Now, if you've stayed invested for the last 3 to 5 years, you are probably feeling two emotions at the same time. The first is pride, because your portfolio is up, maybe up by a lot too. And the other is this weird sense of guilt, like the market is going to catch you doing well and humble you pretty soon. Because it feels like deja vu. Here we go again, near all-time highs, and suddenly the brain starts pitching new ideas to you. Maybe I should take some profits. Maybe I should rebalance my portfolio. Maybe I should do something responsible. And I get it. When markets are high, selling often feels pretty smart. And there's this old line saying that nobody ever lost money taking a profit. And yes, while technically it's true, you won't lose money when taking profits because the position is already green. But for a long-term investor, that quote can potentially be a trap because it sneaks in the idea that banking gains is automatically the wise move. Of course, don't get me wrong. If you want to cash out and treat yourself to a nice vacation, by all means do so. I think you deserve it. But if those monies initially are allocated for retirement funds with a 20 over years of time horizon, what you're cashing out is not just the existing profits, but also your potential future returns. And here is why. All-time highs aren't some rare events where you should hit the sell button and run for your life. They're actually pretty normal. So since 1957, the S&P 500, which tracks the broad-based US index, has made more than 1,200 new highs, roughly one new high every 2 weeks or so, and they tend to last a lot longer than you think. And when you look at what happened after those highs, the market was higher 1 year later, 71% of the time, and the median gain is roughly 8.3%, which is basically a normal year of the 8 to 10% returns you can expect from a broad-based index. So if your default reaction at new all-time highs is it's time to take my money off the table, you're actually fighting the market's natural tendency to grind upwards over time, at least in the US market. In fact, you don't even have to look too far back to see how this entire thing play out in real life. So about 6 months ago, on this exact same channel, we put out the video with the title, "Is it too late to invest in an all-time high market?" Back then, the SPY, which tracks the S&P 500, was at roughly $620. Today, it's about $690. And that's roughly more than 10% increase since then on a 6-month time frame. And that's the part that messes with people. The market doesn't care that something feels high. It can stay high and then higher and then make a new high. And constantly, you have people in the comment section expressing their skepticism. And a lot of these investors tend to always sit in cash, telling yourself that you're being prudent. And while we're not asking you to chase the next market high, the more important lesson or takeaway here is about the importance of staying invested. And on that side note, if you're thinking about building long-term wealth, the real edge isn't really necessarily the next hot stock, but instead a framework that helps you stay rational when the market gets extremely noisy. And that's why we're hosting Outlook 2026 online edition, where you can join Adam Khoo live and he'll walk you through what he's thinking about in 2026. So it's completely free, spots are limited, and it's happening real soon. So the link is in the description below so you can reserve your spot today. So with all these said, don't get me wrong, the market can absolutely tank from here. It can happen next month, next quarter, next year, anytime. And sure, in hindsight, someone will probably clip this video and go, "See, I told you so." But from our perspective, when making this video, that's not our main intention. I think the emphasis here is always about probability. And historically, the odds just don't seem to favor the skeptics. So MFS looked at decades of data and found that investing at all-time highs produced similar and sometimes even slightly better returns than investing on any other day across a 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year time period. So another large sample study cited by Alliance Bernstein found that buying on an all-time high since 1980 actually delivered an average of roughly 10.5% 1 year return, basically the same as buying on any random day. And over 3 years, returns were slightly higher with an 87% probability of gains. So hopefully by now, you can understand and appreciate that the stock market being at new highs or just at a relatively high level isn't a reliable reason to sell at all. And the real danger actually starts when an investor decides to take profit as a market timing move, because now, to win, you must be right twice. First, you have to sell before the market crash, and then you have to buy back in before the recovery. And from what I've seen from investors and traders around me, that second leg is where people quietly blow themselves out. And it's very hard for them both mentally and physically to buy back at a much higher price. And in the meantime, while we are waiting for a better entry, the market can actually rip higher in a handful of sessions. And JP Morgan's data makes this painfully clear. Just missing the S&P 500's 10 best day over the last 20 years led to a meaningful shortfall versus just blindly staying invested. Now, before I even say it, I know what you're already thinking. Moving into 2026 doesn't feel like any other year. The worries feel louder. Big tech companies looks untouchable. The market feels like it's riding on a handful of themes and a few of these names that constantly just push new highs. AI is the main character, and everything else feels like a side quest. And the easiest comparison that many investors reaches for is that this looks like the dot-com bubble all over again. But here's the funny thing. We've actually seen a version of this movie before, even earlier than the dot-com crisis. It was back in late 1960s, early 1970s. Investors basically anointed a group of 50 household blue chip names as the can't lose stock. So can't lose intuitively means that if you just buy onto them and hold, you will not lose any money. And out of these 50 names, you have very popular companies like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Polaroid, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, so on and so forth. And they were the giants of the 1960s era. And they are so beloved that they earned the nickname as the one decision stock. Meaning you make one decision, you buy, and you never need to think about them anymore. Just hold forever, ignore the price fluctuations, ignore the valuations, and let greatness do its thing. So usually, when you look at this sort of storyline, what happened next tend to be ugly. So by early 1973, the market actually split into two tiers. So the median stock on the New York Stock Exchange was trading at around 11 times earnings, while the top 50 crowd actually averaged around 48 times. And then the 1973-74 bear market hit, inflation, oil shock, macro chaos, and there was nowhere to hide. So some of these quote-unquote can't lose stocks actually got hit so hard that they were down 70 to 80 over percent from its all-time highs, and Coca-Cola included. And it took roughly a decade for many of them to claw back to their old highs in nominal terms. So that's the headline lesson everyone remembers. Even great companies can be painful investments if you actually overpay for them. So just take a look. Case in point, it took so long for you to just recover back to your initial capital. But here's the deeper lesson. And this is the part where most investors actually miss. So imagine that you build that classic one decision portfolio with the 50 blue chip names all equal weighted at a 2% allocation each. And you didn't bother about them all the way until today. So the key here is that you have a long enough time horizon where you held the stocks from the 70s until today. And in that group of 50 names, you're going to have companies that were disrupted and eliminated. People like Kodak and also Polaroid. But you're also going to have names like Colgate and McDonald's that are still standing today, and they're pretty respectable global brands in their own rights. But now, let's engage in this thought experiment. Let's assume that all 49 positions went to zero, including your Coke, your McDonald's, but you still held onto Walmart since their IPO in 1970, which have also subsequently crashed close to 80% from its 1973 peak. So here's the punchline. You had a 98% failure rate. You held 50 stocks, 49 went to zero. But you would still blow out the S&P 500's performance just by holding on to Walmart with your dear life from the peak, allowing it to do the heavy lifting for you over the last 55 years. Henceforth, it's important to recognize that a tiny majority of companies do most of the wealth creation, and the rest are just bystanders. So in one of the more recent cited studies on this, the best performing 3% of US listed companies accounted for basically all the net worth creation over the long run. So in portfolio management, the whole game is pretty simple. Did you manage to hold on to the handful of companies that will turn into generational compounders? So all in all, here are the three main lessons that I took away. First, investing is much more forgiving than how many people think it is, as long as you don't interrupt the winners. So one or two true compounders can carry your entire portfolio. Second, valuations at the end of the day still matters. It was kind of proof that paying 48 times earnings for quote-unquote certainty can set you up for years of pain when the regime changes, or just sentiments moving against you. And the third lesson, where most investors probably get this wrong, don't let expensive or just high valuations become an automatic sell button, especially on some of these generationally great businesses. Yes, buying at a sensible price helps, but the biggest sin is selling the companies that are actually compounding. Because once you kick them out, first things first, you'll probably find it hard to buy them back in. And secondly, more often than not, you're left with the 97% of the other companies that don't compound. So in other words, good valuation discipline is important and it will ultimately improve your returns, but letting great businesses stay in your portfolio long enough is what truly creates long-term wealth. And one last thing, if you want to go beyond theory and actually build an investing plan that works for you, join us at Outlook 2026 online edition. Adam Khoo, our Piranha mentor, will be live revealing the opportunities he's watching and the rules that he follows to avoid mistakes, especially when markets are at its extreme. So the event is free, online, and spots are limited. Register with the link below and I'll see you at Outlook. And this is CK from Piranha Profits signing off. Till next time, keep winning.